Jax's revenge domain. You know that moment when your phone buzzes at the worst possible time, that split second when you should ignore it but don't. I'm Gerald Morrison, 48 years old, and I made that mistake on a fishing boat in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. The mistake that changed everything. The crisp morning air cut through my jacket as I cast my line into the crystal clear water of Lake Iliamna. First real vacation in 15 years. My wife Sarah had practically pushed me out the door, saying I looked like death warmed over after pulling another string of 70-hour weeks. She wasn't wrong. 15 years at Nexus Data Systems, building their entire technology infrastructure from scratch, and I hadn't taken more than a long weekend. But that morning, watching the sun paint the Alaska wilderness in gold, I finally understood what I'd been missing. Peace. Quiet. The kind of silence that lets you remember who you are underneath all the corporate noise. Then my phone vibrated. I should have thrown it in the lake. Instead, I looked at the screen. Anthony Fisher, Tony, our new CEO, all of 36 years old with his MBA from Wharton and his buzzwords about digital transformation and agile methodologies. The kid who'd replaced our founder 8 months ago and immediately started talking about modernizing our talent pool. I answered because, well, 15 years of being the guy who always answers. Hello, Tony, Jerry. His voice had that edge it got when he was about to say something he thought was clever. Enjoying your little getaway? My approved vacation? Yes, right. Listen, we've been doing some strategic thinking about operational efficiency and organizational streamlining. Corporate speak, never a good sign. We've decided to move in a different direction. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. We need team members who embrace innovation, not resist it. The words hit me like ice water. 15 years, gone. Just like that. Tony, I built every system you're currently using. The infrastructure that keeps this company running. Legacy systems, Jerry. We need digital natives, not digital immigrants. Your resistance to change has become a liability. I sat there, fishing rod forgotten, watching a bald eagle circle overhead. Something inside me shifted, not panic. Not desperation, something else entirely. I see. HR will send you the termination paperwork. We'll need your company assets returned within 72 hours, and Jerry, your non-compete clause is still in effect. He hung up. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful anymore. It was electric. A voice behind me said, "Trouble." I turned to see a man about my age, distinguished gray at his temples, wearing fishing gear that looked expensive but lived in. We'd been sharing the charter boat, making small talk about weather and fishing spots. I just got fired, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. He raised an eyebrow. From a fishing boat in Alaska? That's either very urgent or very stupid. Very stupid. I managed to laugh. 15 years of 70-hour weeks. And they fire me for taking 5 days off. He extended his hand. Wesley Coleman. And judging by that phone call, they just made the biggest mistake of their corporate lives. That's when I learned Wes wasn't just another tourist. He was the CEO of Horizon Tech Solutions, a consulting firm that specialized in, as he put it, fixing companies too stupid to recognize talent when they see it. We spent the rest of the day fishing and talking. Wes had started his company after getting pushed out of a Fortune 500 firm for being too old school. That was 12 years ago. Now his company handled major government contracts and had clients across 3 continents. Let me guess, he said as we headed back to shore. You're the only one who really knows how everything works. They've been taking credit for your innovations for years, and now they think they can just replace you with some kid fresh out of college. He wasn't guessing. He knew the pattern. By the time we docked, my phone was exploding. Text after text from my colleague Nicole Barnes. Please tell me Tony didn't actually fire you. The reconciliation system crashed twice this morning. Clients are asking for you specifically. Vincent tried to run your maintenance sequence, took down the entire network for 3 hours. Vincent Parker, poor kid. Fresh out of MIT, smart as hell, but thrown into the deep end without a life vest. Tony's golden boy, supposed to prove that youth beats experience. The voicemails were even better. One from HR, obviously reading from a script about asset recovery and contractual obligations. 3 from Tony himself, each one more panicked than the last. Wes noticed me scrolling through the messages. How bad is it getting? Bad. Vincent's a good kid, but he doesn't know the systems. I customized everything over the years. You can't learn that from documentation. How long before it all falls apart? I thought about it, really thought about it. Client calls start Monday. If they can't demonstrate system stability during the quarterly reviews, I shrugged. Maybe a week before major clients start jumping ship. Wes smiled. Not a nice smile. A business smile. Gerald, I think you and I need to have a longer conversation. That night, over dinner at the lodge, Wes laid out what he called the opportunity of a lifetime. Senior partner at Horizon Tech Solutions. Not just a job, equity stake, my own team. The kind of autonomy I'd never imagined. But here's the thing, he said. I don't want you to answer tonight. I don't even want you to answer this week. Because in about 72 hours, you're going to get some very interesting phone calls. When those calls come, remember this conversation. He was right about the timeline. Monday morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from Rachel Martinez, head of our biggest client account. Jerry, I need to know what's happening over there. Our quarterly review was supposed to happen this morning, and your system is showing error codes I've never seen. I'm no longer with the company, Rachel. Silence then. What do you mean no longer with the company? I was terminated Friday. Who's handling your portfolio? You'd have to ask Tony Fisher. Another silence, longer this time. Jerry, we've got $3 million in quarterly payments tied to system performance metrics. If those systems aren't stable, she didn't need to finish. I knew what contracts like that looked like. Performance clauses, penalty fees, the works. The next call came from Nicole Barnes. Jerry, it's chaos here. Vincent's been trying to stabilize the core architecture for 2 days. Nothing's working. The backup systems keep failing. And Tony, she lowered her voice. Tony's been in his office screaming at people all morning. Nicole, this isn't your problem to fix. I know, but... She sighed. Half the team is talking about quitting. Nobody understands how you kept this place running. By noon, I had 12 missed calls and 23 text messages. The avalanche was starting. Another client, David Walsh from Strategic Solutions. Gerald, we can't access our data portal. It's been down since this morning. What's the status on restoration? I called him back. Professional courtesy. David, I'm no longer with Nexus. You'll need to contact their support team. What? When did this happen? Friday, during my approved vacation. Jesus. No wonder everything's falling apart. Look, if you're looking for work, we've been thinking about bringing our IT management in-house. Would you be interested in discussing it? That was the first job offer. Not the last. By Tuesday, the calls weren't just from colleagues anymore. Board members were reaching out directly. Not through HR, not through Tony. Direct calls to my personal number. Patricia Reynolds, board chair. Gerald, we need to discuss recent developments. There seems to have been some miscommunication about your employment status. Miscommunication? Corporate speak for holy hell. What has Tony done? No miscommunication, Patricia. I was terminated by Tony Fisher on Friday for what he called resistance to innovation. Gerald, I want you to know the board was not consulted on this decision. We're conducting a review of the circumstances. I appreciate that, but the decision's been made. Perhaps we could discuss temporary consulting arrangements while we sort this out. The clients are, I'm not available for consulting at this time. Another pause. May I ask why? Because I'm exploring opportunities where my contributions won't be treated as liabilities. That afternoon brought more disaster reports from Nicole. 2 more major clients called emergency meetings. The Morrison protocol you built for data reconciliation, nobody can replicate it. Vincent found your documentation, but it's like trying to learn brain surgery from a textbook. The Morrison protocol, I'd named it as a joke, never thinking it would stick. Now it was apparently the only thing standing between Nexus and complete system failure. Nicole, Vincent's a smart kid. He'll figure it out. Jerry, he's been working 18-hour days. The poor guy looks like he hasn't slept since Friday. And Tony keeps demanding immediate fixes for things that took you years to build. Wednesday brought the desperate calls. Tony himself, voice cracking. Jerry, look, maybe we moved too fast. Maybe there's a way to work this out. I don't think there is, Tony. The clients are threatening to pull their contracts. The board is asking questions. I need you to come back. You terminated me. Remember, for resisting innovation, I can fix this. We can fix this. What do you need? More money? A better title? Just tell me what it takes. For 15 years, I dreamed of having this conversation. The power to make demands, to get the respect I'd earned, to finally be recognized. Tony, I said quietly, there's nothing you can offer that would make me come back, because you showed me exactly what you think I'm worth. and I finally realized you're wrong. That evening, another call from Vincent Parker himself. Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry to bother you, but I don't know what else to do. The audit system crashed again. 3 client databases are corrupted. I've been trying to follow your procedures, but Vincent, stop. Take a breath. I can't, Mr. Fisher is demanding fixes I don't know how to implement. The board wants hourly updates. Rachel Martinez is threatening to sue for breach of contract. The kid was having a breakdown. I could hear it in his voice. Vincent, listen to me. What's happening there isn't your fault. You were thrown into an impossible situation without proper support or training, but I should be able to figure this out. I'm supposed to be the innovation Tony was talking about. Innovation without foundation is just chaos. You're not failing, Vincent. The system failed you. What should I do? I thought about it. This kid didn't deserve to go down with Tony's ship. Document everything. Every failure, every impossible deadline, every request for resources that got denied. Cover yourself, because when this all falls apart, they're going to look for someone to blame. You really think it's going to fall apart? I looked out my window at the evening sky, thinking about those 15 years of 70-hour weeks, of building something from nothing, of watching other people take credit for my work. Vincent, some things can't be fixed. They can only be replaced, and sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Thursday morning, Wes called. Ready to make it official? I looked around my home office at the framed certificates and awards from a company that had just thrown me away like yesterday's newspaper. 3 more job offers had come in overnight. The industry was small, word traveled fast. More than ready, the contract was everything Wes had promised. Senior partner, equity stake. My own team of seasoned professionals, most of them guys like me who'd been pushed aside for younger, cheaper alternatives. But before I could even sign the paperwork, my phone rang again. Nicole Barnes, and she sounded shaken. Jerry, you need to know what just happened. Tony called an all-hands meeting this morning. He told everyone you were fired for insubordination and that anyone who contacted you would face disciplinary action. And how did that go over? 3 people walked out during the meeting, including Jennifer Walsh from accounting. She stood up and said, "If this is how you treat people who built this company, I don't want to be part of tearing it down." Jennifer Walsh, 20 years with the company. If she was walking away, things were worse than I thought. There's more, Nicole continued. The Hartford Industries contract got terminated this morning. They said if you weren't managing their systems, they didn't trust the transition. That's $1.2 million annually. Hartford had been with us for 8 years. I'd personally designed their entire data integration system. The idea that they'd walk away rather than risk a botched handover should have been a wake-up call for Tony. Should have been. Friday afternoon, I got one last call from Nexus. This time it was Nicole Jerry. I wanted you to hear this from me. Tony's been terminated. The board had an emergency meeting this morning, and she paused. The company's been sold. Some investment group bought us for parts. Most of the technical team is being laid off. 15 years of my life gone, not just my job, but the whole company. The systems I'd built, the relationships I'd maintained, the late nights and weekend emergencies and sacrificed family time, all of it wiped out because one 36-year-old thought experience was a liability. What about Vincent? He's okay. Actually, he asked me to give you a message. He said to tell you thank you for the advice about documentation. Apparently, his records of everything that went wrong are the only reason the board understood what really happened. Vincent Parker. Kid had learned more about corporate survival in 1 week than most people learn in years. And Nicole, what about you? I start at Horizon Tech Solutions on Monday. Wes Coleman called me yesterday, said you'd recommended me for a systems integration role. I smiled. Wes moved fast when he found good people. The weekend gave me time to think. Sarah and I sat on our back deck Saturday evening, watching the sunset paint our neighborhood in warm gold. She'd been unusually quiet since I told her about the job offer. You know, she said finally, in 15 years, I never saw you this relaxed after a work week. I haven't had a work week. I've been unemployed for 8 days. Exactly. She turned to look at me. Jerry, you haven't checked your email once today. You haven't answered a single emergency call. You actually watched a complete baseball game without your phone buzzing every 10 minutes. She was right. For the first time in 15 years, my weekends belonged to me. Maybe getting fired was the best thing that could have happened to you. Monday morning, I walked into the Horizon Tech Solutions office in downtown Seattle. Clean, modern, but not sterile. People working in collaborative spaces, but nobody looked frantic. No raised voices, no crisis meetings, no emergency scrambling. Wes introduced me to my new team. 5 senior engineers, average age 52, all of them had stories similar to mine. All of them had been pushed aside by companies that confused innovation with youth. "Welcome to the island of misfit toys," said Carl Anderson, a network architect who'd been forced into early retirement from his last job. "Turns out we're not obsolete after all." My first project was straightforward: redesign the data architecture for a mid-sized manufacturing company whose systems had been modernized by a team of recent graduates. The result was exactly what you'd expect: flashy interfaces, cutting-edge frameworks, and absolutely no understanding of how the business actually worked. It took us 6 weeks to fix what had taken the young team 8 months to break. The client was thrilled. More importantly, word started getting around. Companies that had been burned by inexperienced teams were looking for what they started calling battle-tested engineers. Within 3 months, we had more work than we could handle. 6 months after that phone call in Alaska, I was sitting in the green room at the National Technology Leadership Conference, waiting to give the keynote address. The topic: why experience trumps innovation? The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I couldn't get Tony Fisher to listen to a simple suggestion about backup protocols. Now I was addressing 300 technology executives about the value of institutional knowledge. Before I went on stage, my phone buzzed, a text from Vincent Parker. "Watching the live stream. Proud to know you. P.S. I start at Microsoft next week." They specifically wanted someone who understands the difference between innovation and destruction. Vincent had landed on his feet. The documentation he'd kept during those chaotic weeks at Nexus had become a case study in project failure analysis. Instead of being blamed for the collapse, he'd become known as the whistleblower who exposed the systemic problems. Smart kid. He'd learned that in corporate America, timing and documentation matter more than raw talent. The conference organizer appeared at my elbow. "Mr. Morrison, we're ready for you." I walked onto the stage and looked out at the audience. Gray heads and tired eyes, expensive suits that couldn't hide the stress of watching their experience get devalued year after year. "Good morning. I want to tell you about a phone call I received 8 months ago while fishing in Alaska. A phone call that changed my life and taught me something important about the difference between being fired and being freed." The room was silent. How many of you have been told your experience is a liability, that you need to embrace disruption or get left behind? That innovation requires fresh thinking from digital natives? A murmur of recognition rippled through the crowd. I spent 15 years believing that. I spent 15 years thinking that if I just worked harder, stayed longer, sacrificed more, eventually someone would recognize my value. I paused, looking out at faces that reflected my own journey. They never did. Not until I stopped being available to undervalue. The speech went better than I'd expected. When I finished, the standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. But more importantly, afterwards, I was surrounded by people with their own stories. Men and women who'd built careers over decades, only to be told their experience was outdated, their knowledge obsolete. A man about my age, gray beard and tired eyes, approached me near the coffee station. "I'm 51, he said. "My CEO is 33. She keeps talking about digital natives and fresh perspectives. I've been there 12 years, built half their systems myself, but I'm starting to think I'm next." I handed him my business card. "Give me a call. We're always looking for people who know the difference between innovation and destruction. Because here's what Tony and every other young hotshot CEO doesn't understand. Experience isn't obsolete, it's irreplaceable. We've seen the patterns. We know what works and what doesn't. We've survived recessions and boom cycles and technology crashes that these kids have only read about in business school. They think they're disrupting industries. What they're really disrupting is their own companies." Over the next few months, my consulting practice grew beyond what I'd imagined. Not just Horizon Tech Solutions, but my own side practice specifically for companies that had been burned by innovative teams. Word travels fast when you can actually deliver results. The best part? We weren't competing on price. We were competing on reliability. Companies were willing to pay premium rates for engineers who understood that flashy doesn't mean functional, that cutting edge doesn't mean cutting corners. By year's end, I'd hired 12 people, all of them over 45, all of them refugees from companies that had decided experience was a liability. We called ourselves the Gray Panthers, and we were booking out 6 months in advance. But the real satisfaction came from the smaller moments. Like when Vincent Parker called me in December. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted you to know something. Microsoft offered me a team lead position. 8 direct reports, 2 of them senior engineers with 20+ years experience. Congratulations, Vincent. You've earned it. But here's the thing. They asked me what management philosophy I'd use. I told them about you. About how you treated people with respect, how you listened to ideas regardless of who they came from, how you protected your team from executive panic. And they said that's exactly the kind of leadership they were looking for. Apparently, they've had problems with young managers who thought seniority was the enemy of innovation. Vincent Parker, 25 years old, defending the value of experience to a room full of Microsoft executives. Sometimes the next generation gets it right. The strangest call came in January. Nicole Barnes, now a senior systems architect at Horizon Tech Solutions, transferred a call to my office. Jerry, you need to take this. It's someone from Whitmore Capital, the group that bought Nexus. I almost declined. Nexus was history, but curiosity won. Mr. Morrison, this is Richard Whitmore. I understand you were the senior architect at Nexus Data Systems before the acquisition, before the implosion. Yes, quite right. Look, we're trying to understand what went wrong. Our analysts have been through the books, the client records, the technical documentation. Everything points to a single point of failure, Tony Fisher. Beyond Mr. Fisher's management decisions, we're seeing references to something called the Morrison Protocol. Our technical team can't make sense of the documentation. I leaned back in my chair. Even dead, Nexus was still haunting people. Mr. Morrison, would you consider consulting on a reconstruction project? We believe there's value in the client relationships, but we need to understand the technical infrastructure you built. What happened to the original team scattered? Mr. Fisher has been unable to find employment in the technology sector. Most of the technical staff were absorbed by other companies. The institutional knowledge died with the company. Institutional knowledge, that phrase again. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Whitmore, but I'm not interested in reconstructing the past. I'm too busy building the future. After I hung up, I sat in my office thinking about that conversation. Tony Fisher, unemployable. The systems I'd built for 15 years, lost forever because no one had bothered to understand them while they were working. But mostly, I thought about the journey. From that fishing boat in Alaska to this office in downtown Seattle. From being told my experience was a liability to having companies compete for my time. The phone rang again. This time it was Sarah. How's your day going? Good. Quiet. Normal. I looked out my window at the Seattle skyline. You know, I think this is the first normal I've had in 15 years. Well, enjoy it while you can. Your son called. He's bringing his girlfriend home for dinner Sunday. Apparently, she wants to meet the man who turned getting fired into a career upgrade. My son Jake, 24 years old, working his first job at a startup downtown. He'd been watching my journey with interest, asking questions about workplace dynamics and career strategy. Smart kid, learning early what it took me decades to figure out. Dad, he'd said over Christmas dinner, I used to think you were crazy for working so much. Now I realize you weren't working for Nexus. You were building something they happened to benefit from. That weekend, I got an email that made me smile. A LinkedIn message from a recent college graduate who'd heard my speech online. Mr. Morrison, I'm 22 and just started my first tech job. My manager is 28 and keeps talking about how people over 40 don't get modern technology. After watching your speech, I wanted to ask, how can young engineers like me learn from experienced professionals without being seen as disloyal to my generation? I wrote back immediately. Smart kid, asking the right questions. Experience isn't the enemy of innovation. It's the foundation that makes real innovation possible. Find the gray-haired engineers in your company. Buy them coffee. Ask them about the projects that failed and why. Learn the difference between disruption and destruction. Your generation doesn't have to repeat our mistakes, but you do have to respect what we learned from making them, because that's the real lesson from my story. It's not about revenge against Tony Fisher or satisfaction from watching Nexus collapse. It's about understanding that wisdom and youth aren't opposites. They're partners. The best revenge isn't proving that experience beats innovation. It's proving that the two work better together. And sometimes getting fired isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the first page of a better chapter. Experience isn't obsolete. It's irreplaceable. And the companies smart enough to understand that difference are the ones that survive and thrive. The rest? Well, They become cautionary tales, told by consultants like me to rooms full of executives who finally understand that the cost of ignoring experience is higher than the price of respecting it. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize how much you're actually worth. Your worth isn't determined by how much abuse you're willing to endure. It's determined by the standards you refuse to compromise. The moment you stop being indispensable to the wrong people, you become invaluable to the right ones.